Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is the daily chart of silver provided by netdania.com. You can click on the link below. Now, if we look at this trend line here, this is the one that I've been watching very carefully. You can see that now we've reached the point where a break above the $20 price is going to amount to a break of this trend line. So that's very important because you can see that this trend, this downtrend, has been in place since the May 1st massacre back in 2011. That's now over 3 years ago. So that's a very serious mini bear market, 3 years, and I think that a break above this is going to probably indicate quite a move. Then again, I am expecting some type of breakdown before we get there, possibly a test right up to here and then a breakdown from there and then a reversal back up. We'll just have to wait and see. It's going to be resolved. In my opinion, it's going to be resolved probably within a month. We're going to know one way or the other which way this thing is going to break, because it just the price can't go to zero, although there are a lot of people who believe it should be in single digits. Of course, that's beyond absurd. But let's look at some prices here. I wanted to talk about some issues with food prices. We can see here now Venezuela, which is one that I've covered frequently. We've got this Maduro character down there, and this guy he's crazy. He's a socialist, and he just does one thing after another as a wrong move. And, you know, there's no talking any sense to socialists. But the latest here is that they're setting fair prices for chicken, sugar, rice, and coffee. Of course, we know that it doesn't have anything to do with those things. It has to do with the money. And the money is being destroyed. The currency is being destroyed because they're printing money and giving it away. And they're punishing businesses, and they're just basically destroying their economy. So it's really a tragedy to watch it. But let's read this. It should hardly come as a surprise for a nation such as the U.S. that is used to being told what a fair price for interest rates is, and a fair price for housing is, and a fair price for stocks is, that Venezuela, perhaps a few years ahead of America in the socialism stakes, has seen its price regulator declare today its new fair price for various foods, coming to a Safeway near you any day now, as U.S. food price inflation soars, especially ahead of the barbecue season. As Bloomberg reports, Venezuela price regulator publishes lists of food prices on its website. A kilogram of sugar to be sold for 9.72 bolivars. Chicken, coffee, rice, they're setting the prices. This follows President Nicolas Maduro signing law to adjust prices to fair levels and limit profit margins to 30% back in January. Bloomberg notes consumers in the U.S. will probably pay the most ever for meat this grilling season as costs for pork and beef surge, according to the American Farm Bureau Federation. And here's a chart here. I wanted to look at that, a little bit of these food prices before we start talking about that. Let's start out with live cattle. This is from More Research. And I've pointed these out in the past that we had this a kind of a trend channel with these prices here. This one only goes back to 75, but they were pretty much within this range here. For live cattle, it was 40 to 80. And you can see it in 2002 was where it first broke above that 80. And then, of course, it corrected down. But then starting in 2009, right there, you can see exactly with the money printing. And we know that stocks, just to give you a comparison here, we'll go back and we'll choose the Russell 2000 stock index. So you can see here, right here, 2009, same point, you can see the Russell 2000 in the low 300s. running all the way up to 1,200. So that's the Fed's money printing. And it's no surprise that we see the same thing in the cattle chart. That's the live cattle. Here's feeder cattle. Again, prices reaching into a new plateau. You can see it here where they kind of reached a sustained high, came down with the financial crisis, and then with the money printing in 2009, they just took off. So that is feeder cattle and live cattle. We've had the same thing with the hogs. You can see here's the lean hogs. They don't have pork bellies on this, but they're usually very closely correlated. So you can see same thing, not nearly as an extreme of a move because we've only gone up maybe 50% or so. Price of 160 would be doubling. So the hogs aren't that extreme. But let's see, we don't have anything else here. There's milk. And then, of course, there's the grains. So if we go and look at this article here, this is an article from Salon.com. Now, this is a notorious left-wing rag, and it's like reading the Huffington Post. It's informative to see what liberals are thinking, and this really tells you here. Here's the headline: Real-life Hunger Games, soaring food prices trigger unrest across the globe. What do the Arab Spring, Occupy, Gezi, and unrest in Venezuela have in common? Expensive food and not much of it. From 2008 to 2014, insurrectionist activity has sequentially erupted across the globe, from Tunisia and Egypt to Syria and Yemen, from Greece, Spain, Turkey, and Brazil to Thailand, Bosnia, Venezuela, and the Ukraine. Yeah, right. In every instance, there was a tipping point. In Tunisia, it was Mohamed Bouazizi's self-immolation. In New York City, it was the Wall Street bailout. In Istanbul, it was a few threatened trees in Gezi Park. In Brazil, it was a 20-cent increase in the transit fare. Today, the rest of our world seems poised to erupt, with every nation near and far harboring its own Achilles heel, its own tender nerve of geopolitical vulnerability at risk of getting pricked. Thanks to corporate media, which conveniently co-opts the restless amnesia of the news cycle to distract attention from ongoing systemic issues, this global revolutionary fervor has been presented to us as a bunch of sound and fury that rises and falls and amounts to nothing. But beneath what we've come to perceive as isolated and distinct events is a shared but neglected root cause of environmental crisis. What most people don't realize is that outbreaks of social unrest are preceded usually by a single pattern, an unholy trinity of drought, low crop yields, and soaring food prices. So what do the Arab Spring, Syrian civil war, Occupy, Gezi, and the recent conflicts in the Ukraine, Venezuela, Bosnia, and Thailand all have in common? Expensive food, and not much of it. As Nafiz Ahmed writes for The Guardian, the pattern is clear. Food price spikes in 2008 coincided with the eruption of social unrest in Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, Somalia, Cameroon, Mozambique, Sudan, Haiti, and India, among others. In 2011, the price spikes preceded social unrest across the Middle East and North Africa: Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Libya, Uganda, Mauritania, Algeria, and so on. Last year, world food prices were the third highest they'd ever been. The second to worst and worst years for inflated global food costs were 2012 and 2011, respectively. Now, we get a chart here, and it relates the unrest to the prices. And yeah, this is a food price index. It doesn't really make a lot of sense there. But anyway, so let's see their explanation for why we have high food prices. Yanir Bayam, a food researcher from the New England Complex Systems Institute discovered that 210 is our global food price threshold. That means whenever the food price index cost of food over time goes above the ratio of 210, riots explode. It was Bar-Yam's model which predicted the Arab Spring just days before Bouazizi's self-immolation, as Brian Merchant reports for Vice. Merchant writes, "There are certainly many other factors fueling mass protests, but hunger or the desperation caused by its looming specter is often the tipping point. The epic drought that ravaged Syria from 2006 to 2011 and Assad's failure to respond to it was just one of these tipping points. As Thomas Friedman put it, without water, revolution." Today, the world watched anxiously as Syria fails to meet the revised deadline it was given to destroy its stock of chemical weapons. But all this works to mask an ongoing and greater threat, the same one that triggered the country's notoriously brutal civil war in the first place: climate change. So the reason that Assad's in trouble isn't all of the foreign paid for mercenaries that are in there that are being backed by outside intelligence agencies and trying to overthrow the government like in the Ukraine. No, it's climate change that caused it. Quote, "This is no ordinary war," Friedman remarked of Syria upon his return from the front lines. He penned a chilling statement in the New York Times. Quote, "In an age of climate change, we're likely to see many more such conflicts. As recent headlines convey, this era of extraordinary unrest may well have already begun. In some instances, the link between drought, famine, and revolution is blatantly obvious and doesn't take long to manifest. In others, you have to scratch beneath the surface to find the connection between barren lands, empty bellies, and blazing action in the streets." Earlier this month, Jim Yong Kim, the head of the World Bank, issued a warning that battles over food and water are set to break out over the next decade due to climate change. Yong Kim urged environmentalists to learn from the lessons of the HIV movement, in which scientists and activists joined forces to combat AIDS. The geopolitical climate is sure to get increasingly hot as more and more people mobilize, not due to idealism, but necessity. The opportunity is ripe, however, for the seemingly disjointed social movements across the globe to unite and realize a common goal beneath their disparate aims. No matter where we were born, what language we speak, what religion we practice, no matter what our politics, we all feel the same churning deep inside when hunger strikes. The violence we should all be protesting is not only the sort being enacted by corrupt regimes against their people, but the violence being done to the earth and its inhabitants. As Rebecca Solnit observes, climate change is violence. So there's your leftist nutcase explanation for why food prices are rising. It's climate change. Now, admittedly, droughts can cause crop problems, but droughts normally don't occur all across the earth at the same time, so that's a bunch of nonsense. Now, let's look at why it really is happening. First of all, I want to look at this article, Why Beef Prices Are So High, and I read a good 5 to 10 of them, many of them who were wringing their hands trying to figure out the mystery of why beef prices are rising so high. But if you look down at the bottom of this article, there's a very interesting addendum. You can see here, addendum. Scott Irwin sent me a note with a couple links to post at FarmDoc Daily, which touch on these same issues. First, he noted in a post almost 4 years ago that the corn soy prices then were likely to lead to much higher livestock prices. So what we are seeing now may be the fruition of this longer-term adjustment. Second, Chris Hurt posted on March 3rd about PED, etc., etc. So let's look at this thesis here and think about this. What he's saying is that the higher, and I don't know what the feed is made of, but I'm assuming that since he mentioned soy corn, that it would be made of those. So let's look at the soybeans. Here's the soybean chart, and you can see There was that spike in 2003, and then we had the run-up in '06, and all the way up. That was the inflation run-up we had that went into that financial collapse. And then we had the collapse and prices all the way back down here. But ever since then, that '09 point when they started printing money and sending it into the stock market, bailing out the banks, pegging interest rates at 0%, you can see that the price has steadily risen and now has stabilized at around 1,500. Now, back when I was a commodities broker, you used to hear them all the time say beans in the teens, beans in the teens. Because anytime beans went in the teens, you can see that that's a fairly rare occasion. You know, anytime they go into double digits here, you've got 10 there, and you've got 11 there. So it's a rare occurrence. Brokers were always looking at that. Now we've got beans stuck in the teens. So that's unprecedented. So we're talking about a tripling from the average low and a doubling from the average high. That's soybeans. And if we look at corn, that was the other one that he mentioned. We can see that corn's come down, but corn pretty much traded between 200 and 400 for a good 30 years. Corn traded between 200 and 400, and you can see from about, we'll call 300 the average, and went all the way up to 800, almost 900. So the price of corn doubled to tripled during that same time frame. So this is going to be the feed. Now, the first question is going to be, why did the price of corn go up so fast? And a lot of people are going to talk about the putting the corn into fuel, which is just an absolutely stupid idea. If it was economically feasible to do it, then people would do it, obviously. So that whole ethanol thing is just a gigantic scam. But that doesn't account for soybeans. And you can see that the rise in soybeans is actually more dramatic on a percentage basis. So what accounts for this? Well, the first thing that accounts for it is going to be the Federal Reserve and their 0% interest rate policy. You can see that right there. Free money for the banks, free money for Wall Street, free money to pump up financial assets. Now, we know that the rich primarily are the ones who hold the financial assets, so the rich are getting richer. The poor, on the other hand, their wages aren't increasing, but the prices of food are increasing. They're also changing the sizes on things and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So this is, in my opinion, a direct result of the Federal Reserve. And a lot of people mentioned it back at the time. I think Jim Rickards was one mentioned back at the time of the Tunisia riots and the other riots. There was also a lot of agitation in Asia over the price of rice at the time. I don't think that rice is up this time, but back in the day, back around that time, actually that was in 2011, so I'm recalling from back in 07, 08, when rice was all the way up here around 24, and that's a six-fold move from the bottom of the range, and that's a doubling from the very top of the range. So that was causing a lot of unrest as well. And of course, the question is going to be why? Why do we have this inflation? Well, we know why we have inflation. The reason why prices rise is because of an increase in the money supply, all other things being equal. It's true that there are famines and there are droughts and there are things like that, but those are the sorts of things that we see. If we go back to any of the grain charts, you can look on any of the grain charts, like I showed you the corn chart. You can see here on corn that throughout the 70s, you had these seasonal fluctuations. You had a bad crop, a good crop, and it would go, go up here this year and down that year. You can see here in the 90s, you had a spectacular rise where corn ran, over 500. But this sort of secular trend here, this is completely different. This is not seasonal. This is a long-term secular trend. We can look at wheat as well, although wheat is not quite as bad, but you can still, again, see the secular trend. This is no longer a spike that we're up at these prices. We've now plateauing at permanently high prices. Why is that? That is because of the Federal Reserve, because printing money that's finally feeding its way back into things like food prices. Now, the general commodity prices are going to be, of course, the CRB cash index, and you can see here that it actually broke out above the high that it had before the financial crisis. It got cut in half the financial crisis, and now we're basically at sustained levels at the highest level that they were at the financial crisis. The other one here is the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, and that one as well, you can see a secular change in these prices. So, and that's from 200, we're talking about a tripling of those prices and staying there. So obviously that's the reason. It's the printing of money. It's the Federal Reserve printing money because they have to buy the debt because there isn't enough tax money to pay for it. And about $1 trillion a year is being printed up to pay for this unsustainable debt. So that's the reason, in my opinion. Of course, it's not at all surprising to see liberal rags like Salon or Huffington Post or something like that try to blame it on climate change, which is just absolutely absurd. So we can see here on the silver chart that the one thing that hasn't responded to their inflation, of course, is the price of silver and also the price of gold. And one would naturally ask why. It doesn't make any sense. This would be the place that people would go to try to protect themselves from this rising cost of food, rising cost of everything else. If people are expecting that coming down on the horizon, then they would react and try to protect themselves by investing their money in physical gold, physical silver, to at least protect the purchasing power of that. But of course, the reason why is because we have a massive mind control effort to prevent that, to keep people in paper. We also have a massive coordinated and sustained manipulation of these prices to keep them low, because these are the prices that are canary in the coal mine. Even though beef is going through the roof, the price of silver going through the roof is the canary in the coal mine. That's the way that people can protect themselves from coming inflation. And with the price of silver this suppressed, with inflation picking up, it's an incredible buy right now. And we'll talk to you next time.